Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I never expected to find love again after my first wife passed away. Being an indigenous man in a predominantly white community, I'd grown accustomed to the occasional stares and whispers. But when I met my current wife 6 years ago at a local art gallery where I was showcasing my paintings, something just clicked. She was there with her 3 beautiful children, 2 blondes and 1 ginger, and they were genuinely interested in learning about the cultural significance behind my artwork. The kids took to me immediately, especially the youngest one. Within a year we were married, and I became their stepfather. My wife and I agreed early on that while the kids should know about their biological father, who had abandoned them when the youngest was just a baby, they would be free to choose how they wanted to address me. I never pushed them to call me dad, wanting them to be comfortable with whatever they decided. Living in a small town meant dealing with occasional ignorant comments, but I always tried to shield the kids from the uglier side of people's prejudices. That was until last weekend at Morton's grocery store. We were doing our usual Sunday shopping. The youngest, who was 7, was excited because I'd promised to teach him how to make traditional fry bread. We had just finished getting all our ingredients and were heading to the checkout when it happened. I heard a woman shouting for attention behind us. When I turned around, I saw a middle-aged white woman pushing her cart aggressively toward us. She started screaming for a manager, claiming there was a kidnapping in progress. She positioned her cart to block the exit and stood there with her arms spread wide. The kids looked confused at first, but then the youngest started to realize something was wrong. I tried to explain that these were my children and asked her to move her cart. She mockingly dismissed my claim, laughing and pointing out how different we looked. She continued yelling for the manager. By this point, my youngest had started crying and I instinctively pulled him close to comfort him. My older 2 were frozen in place. The store manager finally arrived, looking concerned until he saw us. His expression immediately changed to one of recognition. We were regular customers after all. He asked if there was a problem, and the woman immediately launched into her accusations, demanding that he call the police because she believed I was kidnapping the children. The manager looked at my crying son, then at me trying to comfort him, and tried to defuse the situation by explaining that he knew our family and that we were regular customers. This only enraged her more. She started spewing racist slurs, accusing me of being involved in human trafficking and claiming they had been warned about people like me coming to steal their children. My hands were shaking with rage. In all my years of dealing with racism, I'd never felt so close to losing my composure. The only thing keeping me from reacting was the presence of my children. The manager had already called the police and we could hear sirens approaching. Other customers had gathered around, unable to pass because of her blockade with her cart. Some had their phones out recording the incident. When the police arrived, they immediately ordered her to step away from the exit. She tried to plead her case to them, but they repeated their command. A second officer approached us to check if we were okay. Before I could answer, my 11-year-old stepdaughter stepped forward. Through tears, but with a steady voice, she declared that I was their dad and complained about how the woman was scaring her little brother. It was the first time she'd ever called me dad. Despite the awful situation, my heart swelled with emotion. The first officer escorted the woman out of the store, while she continued shouting obscenities and racist slurs. When she was led away, the gathered crowd actually broke into applause. Several people came up to express their support and apologize for what we'd experienced. The manager insisted on giving us our groceries for free and banned the woman from the store. As we left, I noticed my daughter holding my hand tightly, something she hadn't done since she was little. She softly called me dad and then opened up about why she had never used that term before. She explained that she had been afraid of replacing her real dad, but now she realized that I was more real than he ever was. The youngest, who had stopped crying by then, eagerly chimed in, agreeing that I was their real dad and asking if we could still make fry bread when we got home. I've been skating for about 4 years now, ever since my parents got me my first board for my 16th birthday. At first, I was terrible at it, couldn't even stand on the board without falling off, but something about skateboarding just clicked with me. Maybe it was the freedom, the rush of landing a new trick, or just the simple joy of cruising down a smooth path. Whatever it was, I was hooked. Finding good spots to skate in our town isn't easy. Most places either have terrible pavement or are crowded with people who give you dirty looks the moment they see a skateboard. That's why when I discovered the townhomes near my house, it felt like striking gold. The pavement there is perfect, smooth as glass, with just the right amount of space to practice tricks or just cruise around. The owner of the complex is this really chill guy who actually approached us one day while we were skating. Instead of kicking us out like we expected, he told us we were welcome to skate there, as long as we kept things clean and didn't use bad language. He even mentioned how he used to skate in his younger days. Since then, it's become our regular spot. So there I was today around noon skating with my two best friends. We were having a great session, taking turns trying to nail this new trick we've been practicing. That's when she showed up. The door of one of the townhomes burst open, and this woman stormed out like she was on a mission. She was wearing what looked like expensive workout clothes and had that typical, "I want to speak to your manager" haircut. She immediately started yelling at us, demanding that we leave because we were on private property. I tried to explain that we had permission to be there, but she wouldn't hear it. She claimed she knew the owner and insisted he would never allow this kind of behavior. When she threatened to call the sheriff's office if we didn't leave, my friend jumped in to back me up, explaining again that we had the owner's permission as long as we were respectful. She accused us of lying, boasting about how she'd lived there for 5 years and knew everyone in the complex. I tried one more time to reason with her, emphasizing that we had explicit permission and weren't causing any trouble, but she was having none of it. That's when she pulled out her phone and actually started calling the police. At first, I thought she was bluffing, but then she began speaking to dispatch. What came next was shocking. She started making up completely false claims about us. She told them we were being aggressive, using horrible language, and that she felt threatened. I immediately pulled out my phone and started recording. I made sure to state clearly for the recording that we hadn't used any curse words and nobody had threatened her. My other friend joined in, pointing out that we were simply skating and that everything she was saying was now being recorded. This only made her more dramatic. She started yelling into her phone about how we were harassing her and begged them to hurry because we were supposedly getting more aggressive. About 2 minutes later, 2 police cars pulled up. One officer went to talk to Karen while the other came over to us. The officer who approached us was surprisingly reasonable, asking us to explain what was happening. We showed him the video I'd taken and explained the situation. In the background, we could hear Karen getting increasingly worked up as she talked to the other officer, making wild claims about how we had been terrorizing the neighborhood for months. When the officers compared notes, we learned something interesting. This wasn't their first run-in with Karen. She apparently had a history of calling the police on various people for ridiculous reasons, from dog walkers to delivery drivers and lawn maintenance workers. The officer then asked if we wanted to file an official report about her false police report, explaining that it was actually a serious offense. When we agreed, Karen's face went completely pale. She started ranting about how much she paid to live there and threatened to take this to court, claiming we'd be hearing from her lawyer before storming back into her house and slamming her door. The officers took our statements and gave us their cards for follow-up if needed. A few days later, we learned that Karen had received a hefty fine and the owner of the complex had given her a formal warning about harassing residents and their guests. The owner installed security cameras around the complex for everyone's safety, but made sure to point one right at Karen's front door. We still skate there regularly, and Karen hasn't said a word to us since, though sometimes we can see her watching us through her window, probably fuming that she can't do anything about it. Being a pharmacy technician myself at a different store, I'm always sympathetic to what my fellow healthcare workers go through. That day in 2021, I was on medical leave due to a workplace injury, funny enough, from a similar situation where an aggressive customer had pushed me into a shelf. I needed to pick up my prescription anti-inflammatory medication, which is why I was at the supermarket pharmacy that afternoon. The lockdown rules were strict in our area of the UK. Face coverings were mandatory, and social distancing was enforced with markers on the floor. I'm barely 5 feet tall and weigh less than 8 stone, so I tend to avoid confrontation, especially after my injury. Little did I know I was about to witness one of the most bizarre outbursts I'd ever seen in a pharmacy, and trust me, I've seen plenty. I was standing on the social distancing marker, second in line while another customer was being served. That's when he walked in, a massive man, easily over 6 feet tall and carrying himself with that unmistakable air of entitlement. Without even acknowledging my existence, he stepped right in front of me. The interaction started innocently enough, with the man asking for toothpaste, specifically the kind for sensitive teeth. The pharmacist explained that the toothpaste was located in aisle 5 in the healthcare section, and that this was the pharmacy counter where they only dispensed medications. The man then demanded that the pharmacist go get it for him. When the pharmacist apologized and explained that they couldn't leave the pharmacy counter, offering to call a store associate to help, the man became increasingly agitated. He started raising his voice, insisting that getting the toothpaste was part of the pharmacist's job. The pharmacist tried to explain again that they were required by law to stay at the pharmacy counter, even pointing out a nearby store associate who could help. But this only made the man angrier. He started shouting that the pharmacist needed to do as they were told and get his toothpaste immediately. At this point, he was leaning over the counter, pressing his face against a plastic barrier, his finger jabbing at the small gap at the bottom where people passed their prescriptions through. Then he did something that made everyone around gasp. He ripped off his face mask. The man began ranting about how unacceptable the situation was and demanding respect. He started banging his fists on the counter, knocking over the display of pharmacy leaflets and vitamin samples. I saw the pharmacist discreetly press something under the counter, and within seconds, 2 security guards appeared from a door I hadn't even noticed before. The security guards told him he needed to leave the premises immediately. The man refused, declaring he wouldn't go anywhere until he got his toothpaste. What happened next was like something out of a reality TV show. As the security guards tried to escort him out, he broke free and ran to the garden section near the entrance. He started grabbing plant pots and throwing them at the security guards, soil and broken ceramic flying everywhere. The security guards warned him that the police had been called and urged him to stop before making things worse for himself. But the man continued to shout that they couldn't treat him this way and that he'd done nothing wrong. By the time I left the pharmacy with my prescription, there were 2 police cars and a van outside. The man was being led out in handcuffs, still yelling about his rights and how he'd been disrespected. What he didn't know was that the entire incident had been captured on the pharmacy security cameras, including him assaulting the guards with plant pots. I later found out through my pharmacy contacts that he was charged with assault, criminal damage, and violating COVID-19 regulations. He was also banned from every branch of that supermarket chain in the country. Apparently, this wasn't his first incident. He'd been caught on camera harassing staff at 3 other pharmacies in the area. All that chaos over toothpaste that he could have just walked 5 aisles over to get. Some people really do live in their own reality. So, I was homeless for about 3 years, alternating between couch surfing, sleeping in my car, and staying in shelters. During this time, I was also a university student, doing food delivery jobs to make ends meet. Every dollar I earned went toward making sure I had something to eat that day. There was this ramen restaurant I liked to visit when I wanted a hot meal. A large bowl of ramen cost just over $10, and I would go there with my boyfriend. He didn't know about my situation at the time since we had just started dating. During one of our early dates, I insisted on paying since he had covered our last 2 outings. He initially refused but eventually gave in. I told him up front that I wouldn't have enough money to tip, and since our university wasn't in a safe area, he didn't carry cash. We agreed we'd leave a bigger tip next time. After finishing our meal, I paid with my delivery service card. The waitress took it and disappeared for about 20 minutes. I expressed my concern to my boyfriend about the card possibly being rejected, noting that we were the only customers there, so the long wait didn't make sense. He reassured me that if there was an issue with the card, the waitress would have returned to tell us. I wondered aloud if she might be upset about the lack of tip, but my boyfriend pointed out that in a college town, I surely wasn't the first person who couldn't afford one. I admitted to him that I had barely any money left on the card, just a few cents. My boyfriend offered to go ask about the situation, but I tried to stop him, not wanting to create a scene. He insisted on going, concerned about my card, even though I told him I could easily order a replacement for free and assured him there was no money on it to steal. When my boyfriend approached the counter, he politely asked about any issues with the transaction. The waitress looked up from her phone with obvious anger, telling him the payment went through but the amount was wrong because there was no tip. I tried to apologize and explain that I couldn't afford it, but she responded by telling me how rude I was, mentioning her family and kids, and complaining about being underpaid. When I attempted to apologize again, my boyfriend interrupted, demanding my card back. I explained there wasn't any money left on it anyway, just enough for our meals. The waitress then asked if either of us had cash, which we didn't. Even if we had carried cash, her behavior made us unlikely to give her anything. I quietly suggested to my boyfriend that we should leave, saying I didn't care about the card anymore, but he insisted I needed it back. At this point, the waitress called over her manager, who turned out to be her father. The manager asked what was wrong, and the waitress claimed we hadn't paid the proper amount. I tried to explain about not being able to tip, and when he asked why, I started to tell him about being homeless. My boyfriend cut me off, saying that wasn't relevant and demanding the card back. The manager then recognized me as a regular customer, questioning why I could tip when dining alone but wouldn't tip his daughter. I couldn't handle the situation anymore and left the restaurant in tears. My boyfriend came out about 10 minutes later with my card, explaining that he'd gotten it back by threatening to call his brother, a police sergeant, to review the security footage for theft. They had thought he was bluffing until he actually started dialing his brother's number. That's when they quickly returned the card. Later that evening, I learned the manager had been recording our conversation on his phone. He posted it online trying to shame me, but it backfired spectacularly. Their restaurant's review page was flooded with negative comments about their treatment of a homeless student. The video went viral in our college community, and their business took a major hit. They were forced to shut down 3 months later. As for my boyfriend, he ended up paying for our meals that day with his own card, even though I had wanted to treat him with money I'd earned. But it all worked out. A few months later, I had saved enough to take him to his favorite fancy restaurant and leave a generous tip. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.